are right here. This tree is gonna, in theory, be saved. They actually rearranged the way that the dormitories are going to be put here in the master plan, and this tree has actually got a little jog in the building, so it'll be able to survive. And of all of the species, if it doesn't get infected with the Dutch elm's disease, this species can really withstand a lot of soil compaction and salt and things like that. It's a great hardy tree as far as that goes. The one problem with the elm tree is there's an imported disease called the Dutch elm's disease, which is an Asiatic disease that was introduced to this country. What it does is it attacks the cambium layer of the underneath the bark, that slippery green cell dividing area, and that's where trees grow fatter from, is through their cambium layer. Now most trees have, you know, maybe 10 to 20 rings of living cells, and the bad thing about elm trees, they have maybe 2 or 3 rings of living cells, and the rest of the tree becomes what we call up the parenchyma and sclerenchyma. There's 2 cells. And I think sclerenchyma is the sealed off cells that are used for storage and not used for transporting nutrients from the roots to the buds and from the leaves to the roots. So these trees are fragile. What happens when a fungus gets introduced that attacks that cambium layer, these trees, you know, they just get killed within a year or 2 of the introduction of the pathogen. So it's a neat tree. We've treated it for the last 20 years.
That's what it said, 2.5 inches.
I agree. But what I like about it is it's the first thing that I see, even before the skunk cabbage, before crocuses, before snowdrops. This thing starts to bloom, and it makes me think, well, old man, you've made it through another winter, which is a good thing. You know, it's a nice thing to know that spring is coming. And the other day, yesterday, I heard killdeer calling. I heard red-winged blackbirds. I heard mourning doves doing their courtship songs, and that really, we really turned the corner. We might get snowed on again, but I think spring has come.
Oh my God!
His name is Winston. Winston doesn't like anybody. Winston, the technical term is, if you could shut that camera off for a second.
Trouble.
Trouble. So the little stream we're going over is in poor shape, mainly because it's just been abused for hundreds of years. And even before Pace University came here, when I first started here 30 years ago, this was an intermittent stream. It only ran, you know, during really wet seasons. Now it runs almost all, I would say for the last 5 years it's ran 365 days a year, sometimes down to a trickle, but it does run. But some of my favorite plants I can see out there.
Oh, I see the skunk cabbage coming up over there.
A lot of the skunk cabbage got torn up because of the storm here. Now, normally I'd be in here picking it for you, but
there's some way back there before those rocks.
I think I'll be able to find some elsewhere.
Keep looking.
But one of the things that happened when these trees all got torn up like this, and when you look, you can see there's a lot of rock and rubble in this area. This area was used as sheep pastures to poke around and do like a little instant archaeology. And sometimes, you know, I've got quite a nice bottle collection from this campus.
He's a bottle man.
I am a bottle man.
Yeah.
I like the bottles. I'm a bottle baby. This plant here is one of the most prolific invasive species in the United States. I think it was voted in the top 10 of the worst invasive species. This is winged euonymus. And it's you can always tell euonymus twigs because they have these corky appendages and green twigs. So you have this, you know, like an airplane wing, or you know, the winged euonymus, and there's lots of euonymus shrubs. There's Manhattan euonymus, and there's all sorts. Now, what makes it an invasive species is it can outproduce and outcompete its neighbors. This area here used to have rhododendrons, used to have mountain laurel, things like that would be the understory. And now we have the majority of the plants we have here are the invasive species. We have the euonymus, we have barberry, we have multiflora rose, and we have spice bush.
Can you point those out as we're
Yep.
going along?
Yep. So this is, what happens is it produces a lovely red berry in the fall. It also produces beautiful red leaves. Every mall that you go to in Westchester, Rockland, in the East Coast, every mall you go to, the plant that they plant in the medians of the parking areas are euonymus. It can take serious abuse. The leaves turn the scarlet red, redder than your coat, and it's a real gorgeous plant. It is a nuisance because the seeds are prolific, the birds love to eat them, and they spread them everywhere. So, and if I pass by something that you're interested in, let me know. Here, look at this growing out underneath this roll here. This is a dandelion. And dandelions probably have made the Scott's company and Ortho company billions of dollars a year because people hate dandelions in their lawns. In May, the lawn back here, right around graduation time, the lawn back there last year had more dandelions than I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it was a bumper crop of dandelions. I personally love dandelions. My next door neighbors around me, they all have a vendetta against dandelions. Me, I don't kill them, I like them. They're edible. You can make dandelion wine, which is the best thing that you can do with a dandelion as far as I'm concerned, or feed my lizards. It's perfectly good food. It's very high in iron. It's very high in E and A vitamin. It's a edible plant, and it's called dandelion because of the leaf, not because of the flower that might look like a lion's mane, but because of the leaf. It's the tooth of the lion, and in French I think it's dentin lion and dandelion, and that's, if you look at it, it looks like the sharp teeth of a lion. So that's the first real green dandelion I've seen in quite some time, and it's kind of neat that its roots probably were growing here years and years and years ago, but now it's gotten a little bit of sunshine and it doesn't care. Give it a place to purchase and life will grow. Where?
Right here.
Ah, good. It's in flower too. This is skunk cabbage, and one of the interesting things, I love skunk cabbage. It's just a great all-around plant. Now, I think that the name for this type of flower is called the salax. And if you look inside right here, you can see, and I'll just rip this plant open a little bit. You can see the flower with the pollen, and it attracts insects to pollinate it. Now, this time of year, honeybees aren't active. Honeybees need it to be at least 60 degrees before they start going out of the hive and pollinating. And we haven't really had 60 yet. So what happens is there are beetles around here, like sort of like a domestic beetle, the ones that eat carrion. And this plant smells, this flower, and I'll try to pick one, and it won't hurt the plant, it'll just keep it from reproducing. The flower of this plant stinks, like rotten meat.
Are we supposed to smell
No,
that?
you don't have to. You don't have to smell it. You just have to have a poor refrigerator. You can pass that around. It's got a little skunky smell. That has a skunky smell. And, and you can see the pollen on my finger. The spore of the plant. And skunk cabbage, I like the smell of skunk cabbage. It reminds me of being a young kid and going down by the stream and catching. We haven't done a whole lot of work cleaning up the debris from the storms, but these Norway maple trees took a pretty big shellacking. They took a beating, and the American or white ash trees, they've been suffering for the last, I'd say 20 years. They've been suffering from different diseases. We had ash yellows. We've got the emerald borer, the ash borer that's been introduced to this country. So the ash trees are going. They're just becoming extinct. I have theories about why our forests are so weak. One of my theories are earthworms are killing our forests. One of the reasons our forest is dying is earthworms. Another reason is it might be acid rain. There might be microbes in the soil that are no longer available to help the trees, support the trees in a symbiotic relationship. There's lots of reasons, but the ash tree is becoming extinct, and it's a shame because baseball bats are made of ash trees. All of the baseball bats. When I was a boy, I could watch 50 baseball games and maybe see one broken bat. One. Nowadays, you watch a baseball game and almost, freaking A-Rod broke 4 or 5 bats a game. That's just the way it was. And if Mo was pitching to somebody, he broke their bats because he'd pitch down by the handle. Now that's happening because they're using maple bats. They're not using ash bats because ash wood is becoming tough to come by. Really good ash wood is tough to come by. We're having a baseball game here at Pace at 3 o'clock, Dave? Okay. You'll hear them playing baseball down there with their aluminum bats. I'm sorry. I love baseball. It's my favorite sport. I hate the sound of the aluminum bat. Ping. Oh, there goes a home run. Ping. Sounds pretty weak to me. I like crack of a nice wooden bat. When I was a boy, my hockey sticks were always made out of ash. Baseball bats were made out of ash. Tool handles like rakes and hoes and things like that were always made out of ash. It was a very, very good hardwood. It's one of the few trees that even when it's green and leafed out, you can cut it down and you can burn it that day. It's a very dry wood. It doesn't hold a lot of moisture like the maples do and the oaks and apples and hickories. So this is a Norway maple. That one with the lumps on it and is a Norway maple. Got some elms in there that are looking pretty bad. Dead ash tree. And the one with the poison ivy vine growing up, that big, thick, hairy poison ivy vine, that's also an ash tree. And they're suffering.
Was there any predominant species that went over in Sandy?
I would say the Norway maple seems to have taken the brunt of it here. Now, probably because the Norway maple is an invasive species, and it's the dominant species here at Pace. So the majority of the trees that went over here were Norway maples. And they also have a weaker branching pattern. They don't branch at right angles. They branch at a much weaker angle. And their wood is a little bit softer. It's a very fast-growing hardwood. It's really almost like a tulip. It's a pretty fast-growing plant. One of the neat things, I don't know if you watch the science channels and Smithsonian and what have you, but there's been so much research going on about the life in the canopy of the rainforest. And it's not only in the canopy of the rainforest, but the canopy of the eastern deciduous forest. There's all sorts of life going on. Now, I wouldn't have gotten to see, if the storm didn't come by, I wouldn't have gotten a good look at what was going on up in these upper branches. This was the upper part of the tree, but we have these lichens and these mosses, and it's really a whole community going on. I don't know what types of insects were living up there, but it's kind of neat to have the opportunity to have some of the canopy blow down and take a look at it. I mean, I'm sorry for the tree, but such is life. The tree that has blown down, and I'm looking at this branch right here, which was in pretty green and good shape. What can someone tell me about this branch? By just looking at it. What can you tell me? What's happened to this branch? Does anyone know? Any outdoorsmen here?
Budding.
Huh?
It's budding.
Okay, it's budding. It's still going to bud, but what's happened to a lot of the buds?
Somebody's had a yummy on that.
Yeah, the deer have been eating it. Now this is a little harder for them to get at. The way it's underneath, so the budding that's going on here, they haven't eaten. But that's one of the reasons that our forest is, if you look at the forest over here, you look at it across the street, it looks like there's a big thicket, and then you think there's an understory underneath it, and there isn't. If you walk into the woods over there, there's no longer an understory. You get out there, and it's like a European park. It's all 80-year-old trees and nothing growing underneath it. For the first 25, 30 yards, 40 yards, you've got multiflora rose, barberry, and things like that. But when you walk in there, there's no more understory. So you don't have a lot of the ground nesting birds that used to live here. A lot of the warblers that are ground nesters, the ruffed grouse, the woodcock that are ground nesters. The smaller ground nesting birds can't survive in this area because they don't have cover. Food, water, and shelter, or cover, is what you need for wildlife. And there is literally no cover left in there. And the reason being the deer have eaten the majority of the plants that grow up. Now here, because of all of the disturbance by man, the farmhouse on that side, the parking area on this side, what used to be a meadow when I first worked here, there was a nice meadow here with a greenhouse in it. This has always had more sunlight penetration in there, and that's why it's dense growth like this. But 90% of the growth in there is invasive species. And a lot of the deer won't eat invasive species. They haven't developed the palate for it yet. It's sort of like me and sushi. You know, it's raw. I can barely do sardines. The heck with sushi. I just can't do it. I haven't developed a taste for it yet. My older brother, on the other hand, he's a latte drinking, sushi eating machine. You know, he's good at that. So probably one of my nuisance plants in this area, but it has value. All because it's an invasive species doesn't mean it's valueless. This is multiflora rose, basically many flowered rose, and in May you come up here and the air is heavy with rosebud smell, the smell of rose blossoms, and it's beautiful. It really is a beautiful white flowering plant. It lasts for about a week and a half, and then the flowers are gone and you have the rose hips. But the hooks on this, the thorns, are brutal. They're all backwards facing. I could run my hand down this and not have one worry about getting stuck by a thorn. But if I go to, now I could run it down, but if I go to run up, I'm stuck. And it is a brutal, brutal plant. Being brutal, it has value. It was sold to the American public by the DEC as a living fence. You put this up on your property and your cattle won't go on your neighbor's yard. You know, you plant a hedgerow of this, and it's true. It's like living barbed wire. The bad thing about it is it's an invasive species. It'll grow 30, 40 feet up into the trees. The seeds get spread around rapidly by birds, and it's problematic. Lots of songbirds use it for cover. You can nest in here. We have, I identified over 85 songbirds, small birds, passerines in this area here. Today I was flying my peregrine falcon, and right when I got done flying my peregrine falcon, I walked around the front of the cage and I saw the owl looking up in the sky, kind of with a very Asian kind of face. He goes like this. And he's looking up, and I told Dave, who was with me, I said, Dave, got to be something up there. And sure enough, here comes this Tiercel anatom peregrine falcon cruising treetop level, looking around, basically saying, hey, if you're a female and you're a peregrine and you're in this area, you got to be introduced to me. And if you're anything else, you got to deal with me. Male peregrine falcons are really territorial, and they're the fastest animals that ever lived on the planet Earth. They've been clocked at over 250 miles an hour, so they're lickety-split. When they dive, there's no bird of prey out there that can deal with them, which is really kind of neat. The red-tailed hawks show them, even though he's 1/3 their size, they show them a great deal of latitude. They leave them alone. They don't want, a peregrine falcon above you is almost, you're willing yourself to get injured. So that was really neat. And when I was your age, there were no peregrine falcons here. They were extinct east of the Mississippi. There were 20 nesting pairs in the Americas. That's Canada, the United States, and South America. 20 nesting pairs left. Now, they're all over. I could hardly ever fly my birds without keeping my eyes open for a wild one who's going to give my birds a hard time. This here is wild raspberries. The raspberry fruit is sweet. It's a delicious fruit. Like it a lot myself. I pick sometimes 6 or 8 quarts of raspberries, freeze them on cookie sheets, and I use them on my ice cream throughout the winter. usually around August. It's very difficult for me to get raspberries before the birds do. The birds know the day they're the sweetest, and they'll come in here, and between the robins and all the other songbirds, they can take every raspberry out of here before I pick them. It's like, this one's probably about 50 years old. The station here says that it's a honey locust, but whoever put the sign here, they put the wrong sign up. And we'll have to change that, Dave. Now, what do we have here?
Poop.
Yeah. Deer poop. Okay, and deer poop comes in all sorts of, you know, my mother would say, oh, but you look at that, they're rosary beads. They come in all sorts of, you know, you could get like almost a cow patty, and you could get these little pellets, and over there they're almost turds, like a dog turd. But it's
What causes the difference?
I think the amount of, if it's green, leafy, lush stuff, grass, more grassy, you get more of a cow patty. And when they're eating browse, tree buds, and things like that, you get more of the pelleted type. And it's the, I think mostly if you see deer that have been eating a lot of clover and what is the farm crop that they use a lot of for really good hay? Alfalfa. They get, you know, it's like you heard the story about there's an old cowboy, you know, he's wearing his old western shirt, he's in his 80s, he's on an airplane, you can turn it off now. Species, and I hope you're beginning to feel like invasive species is becoming part of this lecture here. We do have some wild grapes that are growing up in there, but the majority of the vines that are growing up in here is this, which is bittersweet, an Asiatic bittersweet. There is a Native American bittersweet, but for the life of me, I've never learned the difference. I've looked at it a dozen times, and I can't for the life of me figure out which is Asiatic and which is Native. And so the majority of it is the Asiatic. A lot of people bring it in their house in the autumn time. It's a beautiful orange and yellow, almost reddish orange and yellow berry, very ornamental. You see a lot of plastic stuff at Michael's craft stores and stuff like that. This plant here, which is dying, is a shad bush. And shadbush, I like shadbush. It's got a white flower on it, and it flowers right around the same time that forsythia. You know forsythia, the yellow flower? Shadbush in this area was used as a time to know when it was time to go to the Hudson River and fish for shadfish. When you saw the flower, that meant the shad would be migrating through your area. And it works. It's really right on the money. It's within a week. So that when they planted this retention basin, and that's what this is. This is a retention basin. It takes the rainwater from the parking area up there in the buildings and allows it to settle in here, and the plastic floatables like soda bottles, beer bottles, McDonald's cups, things like that float in here. My guys pick it up once a week, but there's still plenty of it in there. It allows the water to slow down a little bit, settle out some, maybe cool, because coming off of the hot pavement, it might be 80 degrees, 90 degrees, which would shock and kill everything in the stream. So it allows it to cool down a little bit, maybe get a little of the oils and things like that out, and then it goes into the stream, and hopefully it prevents too much shock from happening to the pond and the stream. The number one in this area, most aggressive invasive species, is this Japanese knotweed. It's a polygnum, and it'll grow 16 feet tall, and it's called false bamboo. And it looks like bamboo, except bamboo is a grass like this. It's got parallel veins, and this plant, the polygnum, it has a webbed vein, like a maple leaf vein, even though it's a complete margined plant. It's hollow, except for at the rings. There's a corky, like a cork area at each one of those breaks. You can see down in there. And that's what gives it structural integrity. It's sort of like if you ever watch these kids do science programs, out of a toilet paper tube and a couple of egg crates, they could build something that you can drive a truck up on. It's amazing what you can do if you have the ingenuity. And Mother Nature is she's had millions of years to be ingenious and has been. This plant here, it becomes a monoculture. And that's basically what we have here, is a monoculture of this paligna, this Japanese bamboo, false bamboo. And it's, as far as I can see, it has zero wildlife value. Zero. Birds don't seem to like the seeds. The deer don't eat it. There's very little value that I can see. One of the few plants that I can't find anything nice to say about it. There once was a little patch of it. It was tiny. It's probably almost as big as, and I kept it in check for 30 years, or 25 years. And I kept it in check from spreading. And then when they came up here with their bulldozers to build this swale, it just, every little piece that you break and stick in the ground grows. It's really aggressive. So now it's a problem. Sometimes when I come up here, there are field mice that live in this birdhouse, and sometimes they're here and sometimes they're not. I'm going to take a look and see if anyone's home. And the field mice aren't in their nest right now. They're probably out gathering, buds and leaves and things like that. But I'm going to put a little milk bone in there for disturbing their nest. Oh boy, I really disturbed their nest. That's okay. In a couple of months I'm going to put a bulldozer through here anyway. But the field mice, a lot of people don't realize it, but field mice are the #1 vector for Lyme's disease. They call it a deer tick, but they should call it a white-footed deer mouse tick, because the majority of the white-footed deer mice are carrying in their bloodstream Lyme's disease. And a lot of the other smaller animals in the area, chipmunks, squirrels, and things like that, they're carrying the Lyme's disease in their bloodstream. The first instart of the tick, it goes through an incomplete metamorphosis. But the first one is tiny, and they almost always are on deer mice. They get their first blood meal from the deer mice, drop off the deer mouse, go through a little change where they grow 8 legs, and then they climb onto another animal, probably a human or a deer, and they drink their blood meal there, and that's when they inject you with the spirochete that causes Lyme disease. If you haven't had Lyme's disease, it's no fun. You're probably going to be very, very my feeling is this year we're not going to have a lot of Lyme's disease cases, because I think February we had about 2 weeks of very, very cold temperatures and no snow on the ground, which means that a lot of the tick eggs and a lot of the ticks that were under the leaf litter and things like that would try to survive the winter, they froze. And that's good. That's good, because I'm not going to miss them. Lots of deer poop, scat. The ash tree, the ash tree that's growing right here with the vines growing up it, those are kiwi vines. Bauer actinini, I believe the name of the kiwi is. It's a hairless variety of kiwi. It's about the size of a plum. A little bit smaller than a plum. It doesn't have that gross fuzz that kiwis have, and it's much, much sweeter. It's a delicious, sweet fruit. Very difficult to get to because it grows high up on the vines, and every animal in this area has learned to eat it, and that it's delicious, including yours truly. If I could get a bowl full of them, I'm just in heaven. When you slice them, they look just like the little kiwi fruit with the black seeds and the white on the inside. They're gorgeous, but they taste good. The kiwi I buy in the store, I don't like the flavor of. I love this kiwi, but woodchucks have learned about it, and they climb way up into the tops of the trees, 60 feet up there, and they're up there shoveling the stuff in. In November, there's been a frost or two. The fruit ferments on the vine. It's like taking a shot of brandy. It really ferments, and there's a real narcotic effect. And I've seen woodchucks fall right out of the top of that tree, splat right on their back. And the first time I saw it, I didn't know that it was drunk. And I saw him walking around. I said, "Oh, he got nerve damage or something." And then I walked over here, and there was another woodchuck staggering around, and I was like, there's another berry in the area. I don't know what it is, but the cedar waxwings eat it, and they get schnockered. I mean, people will come to me, college students come to me with a shoebox with cedar waxwings, which are these beautiful little birds with a black mask and a little crest on their head. They're gorgeous. They look like they're carved from soapstone. They're so smooth, and they're up there going, "He can't fly." I was like, "Yeah, he could barely stand. I mean, he's totally faced. He's just." And what I'll do is I'll keep them for a few hours, maybe overnight, and then I let them go in the morning, and they're fine in the morning. But they literally get loaded, which is neat. That animals have learned to. Let's see. Let's go. I think we can go this way.
We have that in South Africa, the amarula. In South Africa, you get the elephants and they shovel the amarula down like crazy, and then you have drunk elephants walking around.
Yeah, I don't want to run into a drunken elephant.
It's the funniest thing that seeing an
look.
elephant walk sideways.
Here we have probably a Cooper's hawk or a peregrine falcon. I would think probably a Cooper's hawk killed and ate a songbird. It looks like maybe a mockingbird. I'm not really sure. I can't really. Yeah, I would think maybe a mockingbird got hammered right here, and that's the prey-predator relationship. The mockingbird obviously wasn't that smart. He wasn't paying attention, and Cooper's hawk took advantage of him and said. And up there we have a turkey vulture flying. When you see vultures fly, you'll see a lot of this. They don't do a lot of wing flapping, but you'll see a lot of. They look like they're tipping. You're like, "Oh, dude." And the reason they do that is that what they're doing is they're feeling for the thermal where the lift is, and they can sometimes soar like that for hours and hours at a time without ever flapping their wings. So I admire turkey vultures for their ability to conserve energy. In the mornings, you'll see turkey vultures sitting with their wings exposed to the sun. They sit there, they put their back to the sun, and they open up their wings. And what they're doing is they're allowing solar energy to warm them. Where most birds in the morning, what they do is they shake to get blood into warm their muscles. But the turkey vultures are so economical, or my brother says lazy, and I don't like to think of it as lazy. I think it's intelligent. They warm themselves, and then they'll drop off of the perch. Normally they're 60 or 80 feet up. They drop off, they flap their wings once or twice, they get in a thermal of warm air, and they might not flap their wings but 20, 50 times a day. It's pretty cool.
What are they doing up there?
They're smelling. They're one of the few birds that use their sense of smell, and what they're doing is they're smelling for dead animals. They're carrion eaters. So any deer that are hit by the cars, that run into the woods, that pass away or shot, or even skunks, they'll eat them. I had a skunk get hit by a car in front of my house in Putnam County, and I woke up in the morning and I came to work and I saw it. I said, I should get a shovel and clean that up before someone hits it again and it smells awful. But I was too lazy. I forgot. I conveniently forgot about it. And I came home from work early, and I was laying on the couch, and I heard thump, 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 thump across my roof. I was like, "What the?" And I thought it was the neighbors' kids, because they get frisbees up there, or their model airplanes, and I thought they were on the roof. They'd put a ladder up, and they were on my roof. And I was like, "Gee, that's what I need. These kids running around on my roof." And so I ran out to yell at them. And the next thing I see is a turkey vulture runs off my roof, sounded just like a human, because it's bipedal, and it soared over and it landed at the end of my driveway, walked out, grabbed the skunk, flew over into my neighbor's yard and started to eat it. And I was like, well, there you go. I don't have to move it. It's in my neighbor's yard.
Yeah.
I don't really like him that much, so it worked out well. Now, learning to identify these plants by, looking at them this time of year, the multiflora rose. This happens to be a honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle. This is privet. It gets difficult to be able to identify. As a matter of fact, this is not privet. This is autumn olive. Stuck me really good. The young branches grow like thorns. And they could get up to this long and really razor sharp. I'm sure you have things like that in Africa, but here we don't have thorns that grow that long very often, and so it's a tough plant. But learning to identify these plants, it takes a little bit of time, and going out with a good naturalist or a guidebook, it's very difficult to learn from a guidebook. Going out with a good naturalist who you can hike with, and they could show you things live, because what a photograph in a guidebook or an artist's rendering in a guidebook can be very difficult to follow. And the guidebooks that you have to, count the number of bud scars, and if it's lateral or if it's whorled, or if it's a real tedious way to go identifying things. It's much easier to find a naturalist and enjoy a nice afternoon doing it. These plants, the thorns are used for protection. It keeps the deer away from them. Deer don't like prickly things. They'll avoid them. Any plants that smell like herbs, herby smelling plants, they tend to stay away from. The mints, the oreganos and things like that. They don't like eating them. It's out of their palate, and they don't like it. So this is really close to budding out and leafing. I'd say in the next, there's my first leaf of spring. Right there. Happens to be an invasive, but there's my personal first green leaf on a woody plant.
What is it?
This looks like honeysuckle. But I'm seeing right here, now that I stayed a little longer, another invasive is this is the honeysuckle, a bush variety of the honeysuckle. And there's green leaves starting. They're half the size of a mouse ear, but they're there. So spring is here. You picked a good day. This is one of my favorites. You smell that? Smell familiar? What is it?
I'm trying to place that. I don't know what it is though.
No. Try again.
Smells like a medication. Oh wait.
Smells like what?
Oh, what is that?
It smells real familiar, right? No, not mint.
No, it's not mint.
Try again. When I say it, you're gonna go, oh yeah, cough drops. Close. You ready?
Smells like
Sort of
medication.
candy. Like
Root
in a-
beer.
Oh, there we go. I don't like root beer though.
You don't like root beer?
I'm a ginger beer person.
Well, root beer is good. I like birch beer, and this is birch. But it's a nice smelling, and you can identify a lot of plants by smelling. One of the things they don't really teach in guidebooks very often. Crush up a leaf, smell it. If you think it's poison ivy, leaflets are free, leave it be. Don't do poison ivy or poison oak, poison sumac. But besides that, smelling a plant. Is it garlic mustard? Does it smell like an onion? Does it have a little bit of a flavor? I mean, most things, if it makes your tongue tingle really a lot, or you start producing a lot of saliva, good thing maybe not to ingest it, unless you're really into some weird stuff. But besides that, smelling, nibbling, it's a good way to help identify a plant, and it gives it value. If I walk around, and this is a European birch tree, but the gray birch is the one that I took the branch off. sweet birch, river birch, gray birch, it all goes by those names, or black birch. It's got a purpose, and you show this to a group of little kids, they'll never forget it. They'll never forget it. They'll look at the smooth bark with the lenticels, the horizontal lines, and they remember that. They always remember that, and they can identify. That could be the first plant. And my nephew, who I hike with often, he, after a couple of years, he came up to me and goes, "Uncle Jimmy." And I said, "What, Thomas?" He says, "I want to thank you." And I said, "What for?" He said, "Well, you taught me to identify a lot of the trees." And he goes, "When I go out in the woods," he goes, "I kind of think of them as my friends because I know who they are. I know what they are." And I was like, that's pretty cool coming from a little kid. He got the concept. It gives it value, and that's basically what I'm doing. This walk is to give this stuff value. This is not useless land. The university looks at this as it's not used. It doesn't have a building on it. So it's not really serving a purpose. And if it doesn't have a purpose, it's useless. Wrong. Nature has evolved these properties for thousands and thousands and millions of years, and when it's in its natural state, it's serving its highest purpose. Okay, man, no matter how much we could try to farm a piece of property, we could never get the biomass off of a piece of property the way Mother Nature can. You just can't compete. In Africa, they're finding that goats and cattle, you can't. It's not sustainable. But with Gensbuck and Aurochs and buffalo, you can harvest more meat that way than you could with the cattle, which are horribly difficult to take care of with all of the pests and the lions and things like that. They haven't developed the natural senses to keep out of the way of these things. So, we should look back to Mother Nature as a better instructor. A friend of mine who comes here every year, Tiyoko-san, he's a Sioux sort of medicine man, and he always speaks that we have a tendency, we shun everything that we should be listening to, and nature is a better teacher. She just has a quieter voice.
Jim, is this a sign of a former farm? This lined up.
This lined up. This was my work. When they put the parking lot here, I put these stones here basically to say, this is my nature trail. My nature trail used to go up and through this area here. It was a big meadow, and then they paved it. And I lost for the last 30 years, we're always losing a little bit more property. When they put the library here, we lost pasture land. We had horses down there. The campus center, when they put the campus center in, the environmental center lost more land. When they put these two parking lots in, we lost more land. So now that they're going to move us to behind the athletic facility, I hope it'll be a while before they come in and start nibbling away at us. So I'm hoping it's permanent. The bird you hear going,
yeah,
that's a titmouse. And a little gray bird with a cap, big eyes like a mouse, dark eyes like a mouse. Here's good animal sign. Can anyone identify this? I know what it is.
Is it a burrowing animal?
I almost ran one over the other day while I was going from one driveway to another driveway with my snowblower. It was a meadow vole. And a meadow vole looks like a miniature beaver. He's only about this big. And he's pretty fat. He's got a short stubby tail, but it's not flattened, dorsally compressed like a beaver's tail. But they under the snow and under this moss, they'll have a burrow because they're juicy little morsels, and they're tubular shaped, and they're real easy to catch. They're not the brightest creatures that God ever created. So being camouflaged and hidden is a good thing. And this way, this is a pretty open area here. So if you were a hawk or an owl sitting up in one of these trees, and there are plenty of hawks and owls here on this campus, besides mine, you could come down here and get this guy lickety-split. But with an inch of snow over this, oh geez, he's damn near invisible, isn't he? So last week when we had that snowstorm on Friday, I was going across my lawn and I went by my bird feeder, and right as I went by the bird feeder, the snow blower was blowing the snow over this way, and I saw this meadow vole. I swear he was saying his rose. Jesus, God Almighty, that was close. And I was like, man, you don't know. If I would have just dropped that down a little bit lower, he would have been in the yard.
Right.
So I planted these pine trees many years ago, and they're beginning to suffer. They're planted too close together. I had heard when I used to use this meadow as one of my teaching classes, we used to have come up here and have summer camps with the camp kids. We'd camp out up in this meadow. I heard that they were going to put a library here someday, and so I planted this to be a buffer to shield the library and the noise of the library from my meadow. The air conditioners and the dehumidifiers are extremely loud, and you'll come up here and you'll hear this machinery start, and you're like, oh my God, but the animals got used to it. I've never gotten used to it. This is a deciduous conifer, which is almost an oxymoron. It loses its needles every year. It's not a pine tree, it's called a larch. And it turns very golden in the fall. In about 2 weeks, it'll be bright green with great, lush, soft, almost pine needles. They're not pine, they're larch needles. And real neat tree. I really like larch a lot. One of my favorites.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Off the camera.
All right. This is a dogwood tree. I can tell it by the shape of its bud is kind of pretty distinctive this time of year. These buds will turn into flowers. When I was a boy, I liked anecdotal teaching. People who told stories. That's what I do. I tell a lot of stories when I'm teaching. My mom was religious. I have an uncle who's a priest and an aunt who's a nun, and my mom's a devout Irish Catholic. So she told me the story of the dogwood. She said that once the dogwood was a mighty tree that grew in Israel, and it was a big tree, grew 100 feet tall, straight wood, and that they built the crucifix for Christ out of the dogwood. And after the crucifixion and the resurrection, dogwoods no longer grew tall. They grew very bent and gnarly, and you can't go find more than 2 or 3 feet of dogwood that grows straight. It's a very dense, heavy hardwood, but the flower of the dogwood, when it opens up, it's always the sign of the cross. It's got 2 longer petals and 2 shorter petals. It's the sign of the cross, and at each point of the leaf there's a hole that's been pierced for the nails and the crown of thorns. And the center of the flower, it looks like a crown of thorns in the center of the flower. So my mom told me that story when I was 5, and I remember that story. And that's, as I said, walking with a naturalist or somebody who knows more than you, or could share more, shares nature with you. When I was a boy, there was a guy up at Pound Ridge Reservation. His name was Nick Schumantoff. Genius, a real genius of a man. Knew 4 or 5 Native American Indian languages, and was part of 2 or 3 tribes. He told the most wonderful stories, and because he was so good at it, I remembered almost every one that he told me verbatim. And I'm not a good student, I'm not a gifted student, but a good storyteller can be a good teacher. And then again, one who digresses and goes all over the place can be a crappy teacher.
I digress.
Well, I've noticed a lot of my favorites do. You ever sit in, is that thing on? You ever sit in one of Gus's lectures?
He is just simply is fascinating.
Wildlife value, unbelievably. Wildlife value, unbelievably good wildlife value. every type of squirrel, a red squirrel, gray squirrel, chipmunks, woodchucks, deer, turkey will gobble up hickory nuts. I love the taste of hickory nuts. My absolute favorite nut is not the macadamia nut. It's not the pistachio nut. It's the hickory nut. The thing is, I have to convince people to open them up for me, because to crack a hickory nut and to pick the meat out of it, it's almost impossible. You will die of starvation with 1,000 pounds of hickory nuts in front of you, because the amount of energy expended to picking the meat out of that nut, it's a very difficult nut to open. So I love those hickory trees. They're really, really good. Beautiful wood. If I had a lot of money and could redo my kitchen, I would redo it in hickory wood. I love the two-tone color of the wood, the knots that are normally in the wood. It's just a gorgeous kind of hillbilly wood. I like it. I like it a lot. This tree here has obviously got some issues. Got some growth. The growth that's on this tree would make it, if this was a sugar maple tree, would make it quite valuable. But since it's a Norway maple tree, it won't be. This is the type of tree, if you ever see bird's eye maple, which is very popular around the turn of the century, around 1888 to 1930. A lot of furniture was built with bird's eye maple. A lot of musical instruments built with bird's eye maple. It has this swirling patterns. Almost looks like Starry, Starry Night. It's a beautiful, beautiful wood. And it's what happens is you get these growths, and they cause these swirls in the wood. And it would, if this was a hickory or a sugar maple or a walnut, oh my God! Every guy who owned, had a furniture company would want a piece of this. A gun stock made out of this would be beautiful. But it happens to be a lowly Norway maple.
What causes the growth?
The answer to that is damned if I know. Okay. I really don't know. I should look it up, since it's here and it's in my woodlot. I should know. It's probably some sort of insect that gets in the bark and causes these galls. I refer to these as galls. There's another one that grows on the cherry trees. It's called black knot canker, and you find it on the ends of the cherry trees. You'll see these. It looks like cattail punks growing out on the cherry trees. So all of the cherry trees that had it in this area are all gone now. So obviously it doesn't do them any good.
I haven't seen these cherry trees on our walk today, have I?
Nope. Here's a little earthworm. Another sign that spring has sprung. This is a young Asiatic wriggler worm. It's not the normal earthworm that I grew up with. It's an imported worm. And these guys have changed our forests. What they've done is when I was a boy, if you went into the forest, you would find 3 or 4 years of leaves piled up in the forest. And underneath that, you had litter, and then duff, which is further decomposed, and then the humus, and then below that you'd have soil. Now, we have almost, 1 year supply of leaves. These will all be consumed by the worms, and they make the earth, they cause it to be beautiful. It looks beautiful on the top, these worm castings, and that's what the majority of this is castings from the worm, from them eating the leaves. But what's happening is the structure of our soil has changed, and because of that, that's what I think is causing a lot of the sickness of these plants, that and a lot of other reasons. But one of them is, I believe we've lost so much topsoil, and the soil that we have is so porous. Things can be too porous. When I was a boy, they'd say, oh, earthworms are great in your garden. Well, I've learned that's not so true. If it doesn't have the structure to hold water, if you don't have the ability to hold the water, then all of the available nutrients get washed out very, very rapidly, and this becomes much more like a rainforest soil. And that's what's happening. This plant here, we all know, is onion grass or scallions, wild scallions. Very, very spicy. You could use it for cooking. It's an edible plant. Here's garlic mustard, another imported plant. by the end of the summer, this garlic mustard will be this tall with white flowers, and it does smell like garlic and mustard. If you crush up the leaf, it has a distinct odor, and it's supposedly an edible plant. I try not to eat a lot of the edible plants, mainly because the wild edibles taste crappy, and I don't need them. I think it's nice to know, in case, God forbid, I ever have to eat these crappy tasting plants. At least I know which ones will poison me.